Hello guys, today I'm going to attempt to describe my own music and how it looks to me with synesthesia. If you're not familiar with synesthesia, I do have a video all about it which I'll put a link to below. But we'll start with Cosmic Cruise. It's very difficult to describe music, that was me. It's very difficult to describe music visually when it's stuff that doesn't exist. But I will do my best. Again, there's only so many words that exist in English to describe very similar textures. So it can be hard to describe the different nuances of the way things look, but I will do my absolute best. So let's start with Cosmic Cruise because it's spacey, and I do find that spacey music is some of the most visually interesting. Same with electronic music and stuff like that. Okay, so this texture literally fills my vision. Again, I'm not seeing things like they're not blinding me. I'm seeing it in a kind of like mind's eye, so I can see that and I can still see at the same time. It's kind of like, I guess, how you'd imagine things. It's just kind of in your mind's eye. Sometimes things do get in the way of me visually. It can be very distracting, but it's not like I'm literally having my eyes covered. But this literally fills my vision, and it kind of changes colour. It goes from white to like a bluey colour. It's like a transparent, smooth texture, but it has like large bubbling bits in it. Sounds really unattractive, but it looks good. Sometimes that's even purple as well. Okay, so that flute sound on the Mel 9 is white, and it looks like a tube kind of shape with it's a very similar texture to like what you have down this part of your neck, which is a really stupid way to describe it, but that's what it looks like. But it looks nice. So you've got the bubbly texture underneath and then a white textured tube thing going over the top of it. As that harmony comes in, there's two tubes and they get smaller. Then as it moves to one, it gets into one big one again. So this texture looks kind of like a cross between water and air. It looks like the texture of air and water combined to me. So you've got a kind of transparent smoky look, which is the air kind of look, and then more kind of, again, bubbly look over the top of it. It's kind of a mix of both textures, that bass tone. Sounds like, or it kind of looks like a round shape with a bit of a spiral, and it comes towards you like that, but it kind of fades into this almost, I would describe it as pixely, but it's not pixels, it's just it breaks apart into these white shapes. Okay, so this is Strangelove, a tribute to Dr. Strangelove. So what you're hearing right now is the Polara pedal, and this pedal always looks very breathy and airy to me, but in a really metallic way. So quite often, there's various ways it can look, but when the string rattles on the Polara, it creates a much thicker sound, and that to me looks like two dark silvery grey metal plates come together, and it's got a metallic texture. as it gets to be a kind of darker sound and much more airy, and it kind of fades out, it becomes a more white colour, but it's still got a bit of a grey metallic texture. It just becomes more airy and kind of floaty looking. But it's a very eerie looking pedal. It looks almost like fog is probably the best way I could describe it. On this video as well, I did put a kind of TV static texture on it, which at this point is kind of what it looks like. I really tried to reflect the visual aspect of this song in what I was showing in the video. This song is pretty much all in black and white to me, except certain aspects are red. So that bass line that's come in, it's really thick and really grainy looking. It's about like that on my vision. Again, bass textures are more usually like this size, but this is like that kind of size. And again, very textured, very grainy. And it's almost like a TV static, but the static is really far apart and it's like a whitey grey colour. So that's a much thinner look, and as I'm moving, it's kind of moving around in different shapes. That bend kind of makes it curve. Again, it's the same texture, but it's much thinner than the thick one. As I'm on the wah pedal, it's changing the texture of my bass tone to be that more bubbly kind of look again. So as the wah comes heel down, and the sound gets darker, it's creating a much softer look that makes it almost look like that bubble texture. As the toe comes forwards, the middle ground looks how the bass normally does, obviously, because it's basically the same sound. And as the toe comes forwards, it gets progressively more metallic looking, gets a very light silver, and it's got a kind of metal texture to it. And it's very sharp looking. Not sharp as in spiky, but certain things send out blurred edges. This is like solid edged. So as my heel's down on the wah, again, it's giving it a slightly more bubbly texture, but it's just a much smoother texture. It's a lot darker looking in colour. And then as my toe comes forwards, it's getting lighter and lighter. And then now that my toe's all the way forwards, as I'm moving around like in that pattern, it kind of looks like this at the same time as having my bass texture. So at this point, I've got an old radio broadcast playing through my bass pickups with the distortion on, and I can see the voices. They look how voices look to me. Everyone's voice looks slightly different, but they all follow a general texture. They look really far back. They look buried behind everything. They're kind of white and everything else on top is a lot darker. They've got their own texture. It's almost doing this in like a bubbly fashion because it sounds like there's loads of voices, so they're kind of filling my vision. Underneath everything else is like a below texture that's white, very thick, less airy than I would normally see voices. And it's kind of, I don't know, it's just very strange looking. So moving on to flowers. So that looks like a classic bass tone to me. It's got the kind of silvery ridged bass. I always think bass tones look like round wound bass strings to me, but really zoomed in. It's about that thick and it's just moving along nicely. So as that higher bit's coming over the top, it's actually making everything a bit thicker. It kind of starts to fill my vision. So you've got the bass sound underneath, and then on the layer on top, it's creating a full vision where everything is really, again, very white. For some reason, this song's called Flowers, but it's actually a very white song. It's a very thick, almost, again, foggy looking song. Everything's very smoothed edged, very blurred edge kind of looking song. So that high part, that's a lot more solid looking. It's a lot lighter in colour than the rest of it, again, probably because it's higher pitched. It looks very solid, but it's got a kind of warbly texture to it, the way it moves around, and as I'm moving, obviously the Mel 9, as it tracks, everything isn't a consistent, depending on how you play it, it's not always a consistently loud all the way through kind of sound, so it fades in and out, and this is kind of how it looks as well. It fades in and out and warbles. So that sound on the wall, that really just looks like water to me. And that's like bubbling textures in the water, but really thick bubbles. Almost like ripples. So this is a song of mine called Stasis. I did this back in 2017, so it's quite old now. And I added a load of sounds that I'd recorded through my bass pickups, and they can create some quite visually interesting things going on. So the actual bass line itself is really round. Again, this song actually is kind of black, like a maybe very dark navy blue. It's got a lot of space. Like, I know it's a solid colour and it's very black, but it looks almost like you're in space. And the bass line on top is very rounded. It's very blurry edged. It's a very dark, silvery, metallic kind of look, but really soft. And the harmonics stick out as being very transparent, very airy, and they're round, so they start as a kind of light in the middle that radiates out and fades into transparency and into the blackness. So the radio chatter that's going on, that really looks like tiny bits of pixels to me, the way that's going through. The bleep is a very, everything in this song looks very soft, but that bleep comes through and it's really solid and really sharp edged. And some of the other sounds are actually, if I remember correctly, something like satellite moving sounds, something like that, something from space that I'd put through my pickups, and they look, I'm trying to describe, like the shape of a tornado, but they don't move like a tornado, but they're that kind of, it's like if someone got that shape and smudged it across the screen. That's kind of what it looks like. My idea on this song as well is, it was partly inspired by the game Half-Life, where Gordon Freeman is in stasis for however long, and I was imagining what it would be like to be in stasis and the world continues to go on around you. So I added radio broadcasts from through the ages, basically, and it's like you're kind of in this spacey sleep state and everything's happening around you. You're somewhat aware of it, but you're not at the same time. And there's all advances happening, like space, going into space and etc. And things becoming more and more modern, and that's basically what the song's about. But the the radio broadcasts get more and more modern as the song goes on, although it's kind of hard to tell what's being said. So those bleeps, I've got my bass line very thick in the forefront and the harmonics being very soft and big in the forefront, and then those little bleeps are very sharp, kind of up here, and they go like that, doo-doo, doo-doo, and they're kind of purpley, pinky kind of colours. I find a lot of electronic music to be lots of very neon type colours as well, and very soft, like neon lights, but round. As those harmonics are moving, they're in a different place each time, so it's kind of hard to follow along, but they move around basically. So this reverse bass sound is appearing on top of, like, as a top layer, and everything else that we were seeing before is kind of sat back. It's a very similar to texture to, you know, on a beach, as water comes out, the waves come out, and as they draw back in, they leave a kind of shape that goes along like these kind of shapes. That's what you're left with on my vision, basically, with that bass sound. And that sound at the end sounds like a big smudge. Like, it's a load of lines, and they're quite sharp, but they get smudged across my vision. So that's that song. So now we're moving on to one called Vox Escort Bass Solo. This one, I use an effect that's very close to my heart because it is very visually pleasing to me, and there's just something about it that really gets me here. I can't describe it. It's a very familiar, almost bittersweet feeling, but that's a reverse pedal, so. So this song, pretty much the whole way through, obviously the movements change depending on what I'm playing. So everything there's no downward facing lines. Everything is almost like a paintbrush stroke going this way. And I would describe it as like how someone would paint wind in an old animated film. Almost like a stop motion type film. I don't mean claymation, I mean, like, you know, as you'd animate something with multiple painting, it's got that kind of jumpy look. It's not quite completely smooth. As I'm playing each lead note, you could say, it changes where the most prominent streak is. So there's a complete texture all the way across my vision, but certain paint strokes are accentuated and brighter and more solid as I'm playing each lead note, and those strokes move depending on where I'm playing. So it was very white, but this part's very blue. Then it turns back to a white colour. Some of them are like thicker paint strokes that are slower, and some of the other sounds are very fast, they kind of zoom past. So this one is the Floating Mountains, and I called it that because that's kind of what it makes me see. It makes me see like snowy mountains up in clouds, very golden white clouds. So it's almost like you're moving that way along with the clouds, and the mountains are going by. But the actual bass tone there, so the looped bit, where you can hear all the high, slightly harsher sounds, they look like solid metallic lines going past, and then the actual bass line that I'm playing over the top with the wah is very, it's like clear. It doesn't really have a colour. It's just like a kind of murky, clear, almost like if you know the stone smoky quartz, it looks a bit like that. And it's got kind of bubbly texture again, and that's kind of moving over the top. Again, this is what I mean when I've said in the past that I can focus on individual parts visually and individual instruments individually and see the song as a whole, depending on what I'm focusing on, because it's all going on, but I can just kind of pay attention to one bit or the other if I want to. So that bit there is like a brass kind of a colour. It looks very similar to a brass instrument, that kind of colour. And it's like it's being, again, if you got that texture, the metallic brass texture, and smudged it across the screen, that's sort of what it looks like. So it's like gold metallic smudges. They kind of spiked as they smudge. And the louder that gets, the more prominent they get. So that's that one. So this song is called Dreaming. It's one of the first songs I did on the channel. It was done on an acoustic bass, so I thought it'd be cool to cover because to me, quite often, acoustic instruments look different to electric instruments. So it looks very woody. The colour of this bass is like, well, it's all rosewood, and the colour of the song is very, very similar to that. It's got a very woody texture. As I move on, I add some effects and they give it a bit of a different visual look. So this again has a very watery kind of a look to it. Sometimes it comes out as a different texture. It's a bit strange how it changes, but sometimes it looks very watery, and then on certain other notes I hit, it looks a lot more solid and a bit more kind of like a metallic plate almost. So it's very strange, but that's kind of how it looks. As that sound's happening as well, it's kind of fading in and out of vision, that texture. Sometimes, especially like when I just moved up there, it's more circular rather than a long metal plate. It's like a round kind of a shape, and it's a lot more white. And it kind of fades in and out. Again, very similar to some of the stuff I've described before. But that's pretty much all the sounds I used in that one, I think. So it should be fairly consistent throughout. So this one is a much more recent one. It's called All Quiet, and it was inspired by All Quiet on the Western Front. So I don't know if you can hear through my phone speakers, but as I'm hitting that harmonic, because there's a reverb on it as well, underneath I'm getting this kind of, it's like two plates of grey air hitting each other and creating a smoke kind of, they hit each other and it goes like that outwards. That's happening underneath the harmonic because of the texture the reverb's giving it. The harmonic itself is very clear and bright, and again a kind of silvery metallic colour, but it fades out to a kind of smoky texture. The rest of the bass texture, tone texture, is very silver. Again, looks like round wound bass strings to me. This one's kind of, so the winds in the strings, I would say, are quite far apart in this one. They're very pronounced. So that sound there, again, looks very similar to the brass texture that I described earlier, but it's not gold, it's white. And as the Mal 9 is changing the sound, it's changing it visually as well. So it starts off a very airy but metallic silver texture, and then that gets more solid looking as the sound gets sharper, and it starts to look like, I can only describe it as similar to the texture of like a cauliflower. Like it's white and it kind of grows like that. Sounds really weird, but it looks quite cool at the same time. That's a very like, it looks like someone got a wire and it went as the fret buzzes there. So that choir sound there really looks like loads of voices, but normally voices to me are like a line that goes this way. On this choir sound, it's as if I'm seeing them face on instead. So it's like that kind of look rather than that kind of look, if that makes any sense. And again, they're quite airy, but they've got almost a bit of that cauliflower type shape texture to them. That moves, that starts to look really blue, although a lot of the track is a more kind of bleak greyish colour. As it turns blue, it gets more solid looking, because obviously the sound fades in. As it starts to get more solid, it gets more textured, so a more metallic-y kind of texture. Particular, for some reason, looks very visually striking. That whole bit is kind of mixes of blues and purples, but quite dark, and again you've got the grey underneath it. But as it moves, it's so hard to describe, but it's almost like paint strokes again, but not lines, more like, you know, if the paintbrush was facing you and kind of it kind of smudges it a little bit, but it's not in a streak across my vision. It's very kind of almost oval shaped, I guess would be the way I'd describe that. And as it hit that note, so it went, the note before that was purple, and as it hit that note there, which I'll play again, it turned a more kind of dark bluey colour. So that turns more bluey. In fact, on that bit as well, it's almost got a, again, it's a wind kind of a texture, but it moves as if someone's smudging it. It's like the paintbrush texture, but it's as if someone's got a scraper type thing and done that with it as well. And then as the other sound starts to grow in the Mel 9, I think it's the flute sound that I'm on, it gets more solid looking as well. It's less transparent. That's a more grey blue colour. So this one's called Somme. It's again inspired by All Quiet on the Western Front and also 1917 as well. It's a very strange looking song. So the low notes I'm playing look very dark, they're very rounded and airy looking, they're less, they're more transparent, and then the high notes are a lot lighter in colour and they look a lot more solid. Again, they look very bright, almost as if they've got a light behind them. And then as the Mel 9 grows, that creates, well, it kind of adds that kind of cauliflower texture again. It's sort of growing on top of the bass texture. So the very high notes look very soft. They're white and circular. And again, they kind of radiate outwards, as I've described before. Obviously the radio underneath, I can see the voices. It's a very greeny, like strange green kind of a colour, very dark, similar to the colour I put on the video. Again, I tried to reflect a bit of what I see. There's also a film grain on the video, which is what the radio looks like. The voices within the radio look... It's really hard to describe, but they're like blocky textures of black, like square textures, and they're overlaid with the film grain, which is obviously the sound of the radio itself. So the low note that I've got going underneath this, again, is a really consistent, airy, dark, rounded look that's kind of back here. And then the high notes are sitting more here. And they're a lot brighter, more solid, but they don't have that cauliflower type texture over them. They're literally just the bass texture. But that bass texture is very smooth. It's not quite as gritty and separated as some of the others are. It's very close together, smooth and rounded as well. So as I'm moving those notes, it's also giving, I can see like kind of blobs of white light as it moves down. So hopefully I've done an okay job at explaining these. I'm very new to this series, so I'm sure I'll get better at it as time goes on. If there is another type of format you'd like to see for this video, please do let me know, because it's a bit of a weird one to know the best way to set it up and to get it across. And again, if you know anyone that does animations or anything like that that might be able to help actually create a visual for me of what I see, then that would be amazing. But either way, hopefully it's been interesting. Please do give me your suggestions if there's any songs either of mine that I didn't cover in this video that you'd like me to describe specifically, or other bands, other songs, anything. I'm more than happy to do my best to cover that. Hopefully you enjoyed this. I will put a link to my original music down below, and I will see you next time. Bye.